Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever. Hello, and welcome back to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. Welcome back. We are so excited to have you here. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of Trifecta Collective, and this is my co-host Shannon Callery. And today we have, and I feel like I've said this already, but a really, really big topic, and a topic that is very near and dear to both of our hearts from personal experiences, and then certainly working with probably hundreds of clients at this point with cortisol issues. So today we're talking about high cortisol. And I also just want to clarify, if you've been diagnosed or been told that you have low cortisol dysregulation, we're going to talk about all of that in this episode. So please stay tuned. Don't think that just because you don't specifically have high cortisol that we're not going to touch on your specifics and why kind of this whole process of regulating your cortisol is so important when it comes to high, low, some other form of dysregulation. And so we're going to get into all of that. So let's talk first. What is cortisol? So the basics. Cortisol is a stress hormone.
Yep. Cortisol is a stress hormone that is produced in, not to get super technical, but there's something in the body called the HPA axis. So really the first place that like the trigger, I guess, is happening, what's being released is from the hypothalamus. And then it kind of goes to your pituitary gland and then to your adrenals, which is where the cortisol is actually being released. And yes, it is a stress hormone, and it's pretty much like an alarm system for the body. Like, it's supposed to be there. We're supposed to have it. But it's not supposed to be elevated all the time. That's kind of where the problem comes in. And kind of like the basics for cortisol is when we wake up in the morning, our cortisol is supposed to rise naturally. You know, we can do things like getting out in the sun and whatnot, making sure we eat breakfast. Like, all these things are going to help our cortisol be regulated throughout the day. But pretty much what cortisol is a stress hormone.
Exactly. So this, and as Shannon mentioned, this starts in the hypothalamus and pituitary and adrenal glands. And so, meaning, if you're not familiar with where these body parts are, this starts in our brain. So this is really something that happens in our brain. It is not something that we necessarily control. And so if we think of back in the day, like if we were being chased by a predator, a tiger, a lion, whatever it was, we need to be very alert. We need maybe some extra support in running away. And so what would happen is this mechanism would turn on, our body would understand, or our brain, really, this is where it would start, would tell the rest of our body, hey, we're in a stressful situation. We need to be on high alert. And so hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, our cortisol would be released, usually among other things, potentially adrenaline as well. And there's some other chemicals that can go along here to make sure that we are in the most optimal position to survive. So this is what our body's supposed to do. It's what our brain is supposed to do. It helps us survive. And it's supposed to be a temporary thing where, you know, these hormones are released. We are no longer in this stressful situation. These hormones go back to a regular place, and our body returns back to a normal homeostasis kind of position. Now, what happens in our society nowadays is we have different stressors. And these stressors may not seem as big as being chased by a predator. However, our brain and our body doesn't perceive it that way. And when we are not sleeping, when we are undernourished or not having the right nutrients, when we don't, we're busy.
Out.
Yeah, overworking out, under eating, just chronically busy doing all kinds of things, work, when you're on your phone all the time and just constantly being overstimulated, your brain and your body don't know the difference. And this is where the issues really, really come into play with cortisol. And we will commonly refer to these as cortisol dysregulation issues. And we'll get into this a little bit more as to why when we talk about the testing, because this will help it make more sense as to why really this is about cortisol dysregulation and not necessarily, although in some instances, high and low cortisol. So that's really how this is supposed to work. And as Shannon mentioned, when we wake up, and once again, we can talk about this in more detail, or maybe we get into the testing right now, is when we wake up, our cortisol is supposed to be pretty high. About 30 minutes later, our cortisol is supposed to peak at its highest for the day. And then slowly throughout the day, it's supposed to come down and it should be at its lowest right before bed, which should mean that we should be able to fall asleep pretty easily and stay asleep pretty easily. Did I forget anything?
No, I think you pretty much got all the points. I mean, at towards the end of the day, that's when our body is supposed to be in a more relaxed state. We're getting ready for bed. We want good sleep. Yeah, and keeping cortisol regulated is what's going to help provide that good restful REM sleep for our bodies, so we're not waking up in the middle of the night. But yeah, I think you hit all the main points there.
Yeah. So when we look at how to test this, Western medicine is great and has its value. However, when it comes to cortisol, often they get it pretty wrong here. And because of that curve I just talked about, where we're starting at one point, peak 30 minutes later, and then throughout the day, it's supposed to get lower, just testing our cortisol once, usually in the morning when it comes to physicians, is not an accurate measure of where our cortisol levels actually are. You could be low in the morning, you could be high in the morning, but what is happening the rest of the day? And that is really, really valuable information because let's say you are diagnosed with high cortisol. What if you have a high cortisol at the beginning of the day, let's say at like 8 or 9 o'clock when you get blood work run, but then you've got really low cortisol. It suddenly drops and you're low for the rest of the day. You're probably going to experience a lot of fatigue, a really significant afternoon crash, really low motivation kind of towards the end of the day, later afternoon, probably like brain fog, trouble concentrating, cravings in the afternoon. And what if then you have a spike right before bed and then now you have sleep issues and you just think, blanket, I have high cortisol and that is my issue, where that's not the case. And this is where appropriate testing comes into play. So when we look at testing, we really want to look at all throughout the day. And the best way that we look at this in kind of the holistic health functional medicine world is with saliva. Saliva is going to give us a pretty darn accurate value of where our cortisol levels are. And once again, this isn't about just once, at one point during the day. This is the best testing does right upon waking, 30 minutes later, which is your cortisol awakening response, which is why we're measuring it, those two within the first 30 minutes. And then usually it's another like 3 to 4 tests throughout the day, usually sometime in the middle of the day, sometime in the afternoon, and then at the very least right before bed. Some will do at some point in the middle of the night. Some will do another marker between that like afternoon and bedtime time. But generally speaking, we need all of that information. And I'll certainly go over some of my test results because I've done a lot of these tests. But some sort of saliva test is necessary and what is highly recommended to get the most accurate picture of this. And to be honest, cortisol testing is pretty cheap if it's done by itself. There's a few companies that do it. Probably the most popular one is a Dutch test. They have a cortisol test just by itself, or you can do it in addition to sex hormone testing. But we really want to look at that throughout the day. I will also say, just as someone who has taken a lot of these tests, it's a challenging test because you have to spit into this little tube, but you need to have not drank anything right before, and it also you need to not have any bubbles in it, and you have to get it up to a certain line in the little vial with no bubbles, which just it's a whole struggle by itself to do that, but it is the most accurate way that I've seen, at least, in order to test cortisol.
Yeah, and it's not like by any means an awful test to do. And I will say too, like testing for, you know, cortisol dysregulation, I'll say, it is great, but I do feel like that's another one of those things where there are also a lot of symptoms that like it's I don't want to say like, fairly easy, but it is sometimes fairly easy when you're talking to someone without that test to see like what's going in the body. Just because like you had mentioned the cravings in the afternoon or like the spikes, and this kind of goes with blood sugar regulation as well. Like some of these things kind of sound the same because they are so closely related.
Yeah, and remind me, I want to come back to this. I want to talk about why breakfast is so important when it comes to cortisol and blood sugar regulation and what
Yeah.
happens with insulin. But I want to talk like what are some common test results that come back, and then I want to dig into symptoms because the symptoms are really valuable. I will also say, if you look at any of our content on social media, we talk a lot about common symptoms of cortisol dysregulation. Sometimes we'll label it as high cortisol or low cortisol. And it's really honestly just to grab attention because that's what people relate to. But we'll talk about what symptoms kind of correspond to where you probably are at what time of the day. And this will be super helpful. So I'll tell you like common test results. So easy ones, we can see high across the board. And what we'll see is a normal curve. So we'll see this like spike and then dip throughout the day, but everything is elevated. Same thing with low. We could see low across the board and see that, but see a nice curve is what we call it throughout the day. In which case you're low, but at least you have a good curve. And this curve is really, really important. I've had low curves. I've had high curves. I've also had straight lines. And what this means is I wake up and my cortisol level is technically a little bit high. I'm trying to remember my exact test. A little bit high, and then it didn't change, which meant it was low. And then it continued to not change, in which case it was high throughout the rest of the day. But it's because it was literally a straight line and did not change throughout the day, which is absolutely not supposed to happen. You can also have a reverse curve where you start low and then you gradually increase throughout the day, which is also not great. And I'm going to guess you have some pretty significant energy issues, fatigue, and sleep issues if you're a person like that. So, I mean, you can have any or all of those combinations or kind of somewhere in between when it comes to these results. So the label of high or low cortisol, yes, it applies to some people, but so often not for the right reasons. And so I just think it's so important for you to understand that we need that picture of really like to label you as high or low cortisol. Like you should have a normal curve if you have high or low cortisol. Otherwise, you basically have cortisol dysregulation. And so if we blanket statement kind of you have a cortisol dysregulation issues and address it that way, because how we address it is largely the same. And we'll get into conventional things that people do and then how we actually address it and how we help people heal from cortisol issues.
Yeah.
So all of that is super, super important.
And I'm trying to think too, see, you've had more of the cortisol testing done than I have, because that was one of the things like throughout my healing journey. I believe I only did one of the saliva tests, and it was the one that was like 4 or 5 times a day, spitting into the cup. But if I remember correctly, my results were just like straight high, like progressively got higher and higher all throughout the day up until at night. But yeah, that this is one area where you for sure have had the testing done more times than I have in this realm. So
Yeah, and this is I mean, gosh, the number of times I had the same, I mean, this goes with the stool test too, but just the number of times I had a practitioner of some sort, providers of some sort tell me, oh, you've got cortisol issues, like let's do a test. Oh, let's do this protocol. And then maybe it worked for a couple weeks. If I was really lucky, most of them did not do much of anything.
yeah, and again, that was like I don't even remember anyone really talking that much about this issue to me. And it was now looking back on it, that was like a huge part of all of my issues. And if anything was being done to try and help that, it was purely through supplementation, probably like an adrenal supporting supplement. And like that's it. And now looking back on that from like what we know and in how we help people, that's so crazy because we know that that one thing isn't gonna do much. Like there's
Yeah.
so many other things that need to be addressed besides just taking a supplement to support your adrenals.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like, as I'm reflecting back, I wonder if it was because I had hypothyroid issues and then later diagnosed autoimmune thyroid related, if that played a part. Because if we look at, especially once I got into like pretty in-depth, like very, we'll say technical, um, nitpicky, focus on like really focus on one or two things, which is not the best and not how most people heal. That I mean, because the cortisol slash just the adrenals in general and the thyroid play such a big issue, play such a big role together. If you're unfamiliar, so we have the HPA axis, and then we also have the HPT axis, so the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. So if you have thyroid issues, hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, thyroid autoimmunity, a lot of times in the functional medicine world or holistic health world, cortisol will be brought up. And the adrenal health in general will be brought up because these two things play such a big role. There's a reason, and this all starts in the brain. And there's also bigger picture, there's bigger reasons why these two things play such a big role together that we'll certainly dive into here. So yeah, let's talk about some symptoms here because there's some really specific ones, and there's also, and this is really top of mind for me because I post a lot of content around this. I see a lot of other people's content about this, and so I want to clarify some things that may or may not actually be cortisol related that I'm seeing more and more people talk about. And this, for me, it's not related directly in the way that they're saying it's so directly related. So let's talk about just blanket symptoms here.
Ooh, yes. And I want you to dive into that more because you see more of the social media side than I do because you were the one posting all the content and whatnot. So I'm like, wait, what's going on out there? Like, what are people saying? What's not true? Do you want to start with that?
No, let's talk about just basic symptoms first, because I think this will be a nice leeway into the other piece.
Okay. So basic symptoms of cortisol dysregulation. We'll say that. I was going to say high cortisol, but not necessarily. So a huge one that I see that we both see is, when you're struggling to lose weight around like your belly area, that's a big one.
Let's
Puffiness,
let's just talk about this one because there's also an I'm so passionate about this
huge one.
topic. Yeah.
I know.
Let's let's definitely talk about this. So it's almost like a tire around your belly. Like it's a very specific lower belly fat that happens. It's not just like belly fat in general, but it's really like low belly fat where you start to gain weight here and or maybe you're actually losing weight everywhere except right there. We've worked with someone in the past where like she lost a bunch of weight everywhere except there. And like her pant size didn't change, like to the point where like she dropped like several sizes of clothes in general, except her pants did not change size because of that lower belly fat. And this is directly related to cortisol. The adrenals, and I'm sure we'll dive deeper into this in another topic, but I do want to mention this. So the adrenals play a huge role when menstruating women transition into perimenopause and then into menopause. And one of the really common symptoms in that transitionary process is lower belly fat weight gain. And like this really stubborn belly fat that people, like women, have such a hard time losing. And it's so like prominent. And a lot of times, I mean, I've seen people gain like 10, 20, 30 plus pounds. And a lot of it is very specific to there. And even if they've had flat bellies for most of their lives, all of a sudden they have this lower belly fat that just like they're doing all of the things. They're weightlifting, eating in a caloric deficit, like sleeping, doing all these things, but it's not budging. And there's a very specific reason why. And this is why adrenal health is so important, especially if I mean, this is something I think about literally all the time. I have a while to go before menopause. I've already been in perimenopause and I've reversed it, and I'm already planning on going back at some point. But this is so significant because when the ovaries start to shut down hormone production, our adrenals take over some of that. And if your adrenals are already in not the best place, you're going to end up with many of these symptoms, which means that if you take care of your adrenals and you actually heal your cortisol levels, heal your adrenals, many of these things can be avoided and or limited during the transition into perimenopause and into menopause. And one of the big ones is this lower belly weight gain.
Yeah. And as you're sitting here saying this, like what's popping into my head is like pretty much we just need to enlighten people that we need to not be so stressed out all the time because if we can just learn how to actually regulate our nervous systems and like keep our body in a calm state, like this is how you do this. Um, but I know that we're going to get into that in a minute here. So
Yeah.
a little bit more about symptoms. So yes, the tire weight around your belly that just like won't seem to go away is probably the biggest one, along with like a puffy face. I would say that's another really big one.
They call it, sorry to interrupt you again.
No, you're
Moon
good.
face is what they
Yes,
call it.
moon face. Yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
Hmm.
Yeah, moon face. And it's like it's just like a bloat. It's like a bloat of the face, essentially. And you'll know, you can, when we're working with clients and they get to that point where like they just kind of start to feel it fall off, it's crazy to see the changes in people's faces. And I don't know if you experienced that symptom, but I had it bad. I had like horrible moon face. And looking back in photos, like you can, it's very, very different. So that's another really big one. Waking up at like between like 2 and 3 a.m., I would say is another really big symptom. In that dip of energy, like midday, probably 3 and 4, that's another big symptom. What other ones? Those are like the
I
big
mean,
ones that are,
sleep issues in general, trouble
yeah.
falling asleep and trouble staying asleep. And a lot of times, and I say this from personal experience and also someone who has a very long history of anxiety. So I'm saying this from this perspective, but a lot of times cortisol dysregulation issues can show up as anxiety and can seem
Mm.
like anxiety. And you can also have both. Like I also want to say like you can have anxiety issues and cortisol dysregulation issues, but for some people, anxiety can show up as cortisol dysregulation issues because largely this can seem very similar. If you have the racing thoughts, like your brain just never stops, just is always going through like loops and patterns, and you're thinking about all of the things you could have said in situations from like 20 years ago, all of the things that could happen in the future, replaying the whole day, what might happen tomorrow. Just like literally your brain will never turn off. That is a hugely common symptom of cortisol dysregulation issues that is also very commonly associated with anxiety as well. Same thing if you're waking up between that like two, and I really, like 2:30 to 3:30 kind of time frame. If you wake up and then can't fall back asleep, if you wake up and your brain just starts going, and once again, will not stop, and now you can't fall back asleep, and you're just like awake, and you're like, oh my goodness, like what do I even do? And you're like literally wide awake until maybe eventually you do fall back asleep, and then when you wake up, you feel awful. That is a huge sign of cortisol dysregulation issues because you had this huge spike of cortisol and oftentimes adrenaline as well. And then eventually it drops down enough that you can fall back asleep. And then when you wake up, it's like really low and you just like you feel awful and you feel so tired, which is often really common if you have lower cortisol levels in the morning and or you don't get the correct or a good amount of cortisol awakening response. You often feel really tired in the morning. Like it'll take you an hour or 2 hours to really start to like get moving, get going. Like you might feel really heavy. You might hit that snooze button like a whole bunch of times. Like that is really common with cortisol dysregulation issues.
Yeah. Yeah. The fatigue in the morning when you get up. Yeah. That's another really big one.
Yeah.
So what about maybe let's dive into the other things that people are saying
Well,
that you're
so I have more symptoms.
okay.
I because I talk about this so much on like on social media. I mean, I have a bunch of symptoms.
Yeah.
If you wake up in the morning and you're not hungry, like if you just
Oh,
like
yeah.
you're not hungry for usually a couple hours, maybe even until lunchtime, this is a sign of cortisol dysregulation issues. And here's the thing. Intermittent fasting has its time and place for sure. And yes, you can train your body to intermittent fast and not be super hungry for a while after you wake up. However,
I was waiting for you to bring
yeah.
this up.
However, if you're almost using that as an excuse because you're not hungry in the morning, that's where this can become a really big issue. And I see this, full disclosure, I see this more of an issue with women, especially menstruating women, than anything else. if if you're just like not hungry, like you'd have to force feed yourself in the morning and like almost to the point where like even the thought of food makes you a little nauseous. This is not a good sign. You should be waking up hungry within the first like 30 to 60 minutes. It is very natural. Our body has rested, has had a period of time where it has fasted and had enough time to heal and rejuvenate itself, and it's ready in time for you to feed your body and your brain. And if you're not, once again, this is dependent on the person. And yes, intermittent fasting has a time and a place. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in another episode. But for many, this is intermittent fasting. It can be an excuse of just not to eat. Oh, I just don't eat until noon, until lunch because I'm not hungry. And I just do intermittent fasting as a result. Yes, but maybe you're also just hiding up some symptoms that you're really struggling with here.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
gonna say there's probably more behind that. I mean, yeah, we've worked with enough people to dig in and get to the reason to maybe why they're avoiding eating in the morning too. So
exactly. And if you have these weight issues, especially that lower belly weight, intermittent fasting can sound really appealing. Same thing like if you're doing high intensity workouts first thing in the morning to lose weight and not eating for a while and then have this lower belly fat, you better believe cortisol is playing a big role here. And doing harder workouts, doing fasted workouts, not eating for longer periods of time is not going to help you heal your body. Um, Irritability, I'll say mood in general, low mood, irritability, mood swings is very common with cortisol. But I would say irritability being really the biggest one. You may also experience like heart palpitations or just like feeling like your heart is racing a lot. Maybe even sometimes you can hear your heartbeat. Um, that's really common. And just like this overall sense of like nervousness, overwhelm. Once again, like this can overlap with anxiety, but sometimes it's both, sometimes it's just one or the other. But this like internal sense of restlessness, I think is a really good way to describe this,
yes.
is really, really common. You may also have some temperature regulation issues when it comes to cortisol. Once again, this is starting with the brain, and we know that the hypothalamus, in particular, along with the thyroid, these two things play a really big role in regulating our body temperature. Once again, the thyroid and the adrenals go hand in hand here. This all starts with the hypothalamus. And so if we've got these cortisol dysregulation issues, we've also got some thyroid issues, we can really end up with some temperature issues, which once again, we go back to this perimenopause, menopause, hot flashes, night sweats. And I'll say you may have night sweats in particular, even if you are not in this transitionary process, if you have cortisol dysregulation issues.
Oh yeah. Um, I mean, that was something that I dealt with. The night sweat stuff, yeah, that doesn't always, there could be many other reasons for that. This being one of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely think you summed up the main symptoms there because I'm not thinking of any other ones as of right now. But yeah, I'm still curious to hear this other side of what people are saying.
Yeah, so let's dig in. And I think the biggest mistake here is digestion and digestive related issues going back to cortisol. Now, this is a mistake and a little bit true at the same time, but not always for the right reasons. So if we think about so high cortisol, I mean, I've seen like videos or posts, I'll just say posts in general, of like all of your digestive issues, your bloating, your gas, your acid reflux, like all of this is related back to cortisol. Probably not. Not saying that cortisol is not playing a role here because, yes, we'll say chronic stress impacts the body in a really significant way. However, this may not all be cortisol related. And also, even if it started with cortisol, and really we'll say chronic stress really started this, other things go wrong down the line here. So if we think about chronic stress, if our body's chronically stressed, we're going to have lower stomach acid production. Our adrenals are also going to soak up a bunch of extra nutrients. And a lot of these nutrients are required to make stomach acid. Low stomach acid, a lot of people have this issue. We're usually going to end up with some digestive issues. Bloating is a big one. Now, this can also downstream effect into other issues that lead to gut overgrowth issues. Now, just addressing cortisol will not usually fix all of your gut issues. Will it help with digestion? Yeah, for sure. Reducing stress goes a really long way in helping with your digestion. It is not going to fix it. I'll also say, just like chronic inflammatory issues, autoimmune issues, the root cause here is not cortisol, is not high cortisol, is not cortisol dysregulation. All of your sex hormone imbalances, your excess estrogen, your low progesterone, your excess testosterone, PCOS, like the root cause isn't cortisol. Now, cortisol may be playing a role and high stress, and we're going to talk about this here when we talk about how we approach cortisol dysregulation issues in general. But there's an underlying factor that's not that people aren't talking about here. And it's not just if you regulate your cortisol with, rhodiola, with this herb, like this is not going to fix all of your issues. I'm really sorry to burst your bubble. Yes, it may help. I'm not saying that because yes, reducing the chronic stress in your body, using adaptogens as a part of that, yes, it can absolutely help. Will it fix everything long term? And that's what we're really interested in. Will it address these issues so that not only do you heal, but you then stay healed and you shouldn't have to be on a product like this for the rest of your life? Like that is not the goal here. So I think that's the biggest mistake here. Like high cortisol is not your only root cause of all of your gut and thyroid and autoimmune and inflammation and all of these issues. Yes, it can play a part, but it's also not a major root cause.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I didn't know where you're going to go with that, but yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's definitely, I wouldn't label that as like a root cause. I think it's part of it. And usually like when we're talking about root cause, it's not going to be just like one thing anyway. It's normally going to be at least like two or three things, maybe a little bit more than that. So yeah, just doing that one thing, like taking a couple supplements and whatnot, yeah, that's not going to fix the problem. And I do think it's unfortunate and sad because I feel like we have both seen like a handful of practitioners that's kind of like their go-to to help people, and that's when people end up coming our way is when that doesn't work.
Yeah. And the other one I forgot here is hair thinning and hair loss.
Oh yeah. Yep.
This, yes, kind of. Cortisol can play a role here. This is more related to the thyroid than anything else, among some other things, but usually this is very much more directly thyroid related, which once again, yes, the thyroid and cortisol and the adrenals, like all of this stuff really goes hand in hand. But if your hair is falling out, if your hair is thinning, if you've got a bunch of scalp issues, just using ashwagandha. And I'm just like throwing out some of the big ones that I see all the time, like rhodiola, ashwagandha, these special like blends that are now like really popular. These, a mushroom tea, like these aren't going to fix you long term.
And by no means we're not hating on any of these things because we use some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not the only thing. Like this one thing isn't going to fix it all.
Yeah. And really like no one supplement at the end of the day, our real point is no one supplement is going to heal and fix your cortisol dysregulation issues at the end of the day.
Yes. Absolutely. And then to add to the hair loss thing, it's the outer third of your left eyebrow is another big one too when it comes to hair loss. And yes, your hair can fall out too. Like when we go through just like really stressful periods, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in other episodes as well, but like your hair falling out again, like that can happen when you're super stressed out. These people that we're seeing, it's more of like a consistent thing. Like it's been like years, whatever, that, when they're in the shower, like clumps of hair, lots of hair is coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was like peak like thyroid autoimmunity, I would just like, and I'm like, oh, my hair is so nice now. Like you would have never guessed I had thyroid problems, but like I would like wash my hair and I'd pull like a huge clump of hair out and I just like put it on the wall. If my husband saw it, he'd be like, what is going on? Like, why is there so much hair? Like that was from one shower. Like, what is going on with your hair?
Yeah. Yeah, that is definitely a big one. And that's a frustrating one too.
Yeah.
All of these symptoms are really frustrating to deal with, but when your hair's falling out, I mean, I feel like that's a great sign for your body saying like, "Hey, I need you to give me some love and pay attention to me because something is wrong here." Like our hair should not be falling out like that. That's not a normal thing.
Yeah. So let's talk about how some standard protocols that a lot of people use here. So I would say that a big one kind of across the board is mineral balancing, is what I'll kind of throw in there. And we'll talk specifics here. But like I kind of mentioned, when the adrenals are doing a lot of work, when they're stressed, when they're fatigued, when they're overworked, they do pull a lot of nutrients from the body. And so one of the standard ways to do this is to just replenish those nutrients. And this can look like a lot of things. I'd say the most common one, and this is a big one going around right now, are these like uh, healing cocktails. I'd say we commonly call them adrenal cocktails.
Mm.
And they consist of some sort of whole food vitamin C, sodium, and potassium. As a way to replenish. And there's a lot of recipes out there. There's some, I personally use like this is something I always have on hand during periods of stress. Jigsaw, I think it's Jigsaw Health, has capsules and a powder form of adrenal cocktails that just make it really easy. But you can do this with like orange juice and some cream of tartar and some salt. Is kind of like probably the most standard recipe for these adrenal cocktails.
Yep. Yeah. People add a little bit of coconut water in there too
Mhm.
sometimes for the potassium. But yeah, and there's again, nothing wrong with this. However, it's not going to fix the problem. This is more of like a Band-Aid fix.
Yeah, and yes, like you're missing nutrients. Like, yes, this is a great idea, but once again, you shouldn't be on adrenal cocktails forever. Like, this should not be a forever thing. I use them when I'm undergoing short periods of a lot of stress, where I know my cortisol levels are more prone to be dysregulated, maybe where my sleep isn't as good, I'm working longer hours. Things like that, and I'll just have that on hand. I'll take it for a few days or even maybe a couple weeks at a time, and then not need it for months on end. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's super good, but once again, this shouldn't be a forever thing.
Yeah. Yep. And another, were you going to talk about cortisol manager? Okay. A cortisol manager, that is one of our favorites that we use with clients, but again, we're not using it to fix the problem. It's more to like support throughout so we can help people get good sleep because just, we need sleep to have our cortisol levels balanced. So this is a good tool supplement to get to that point. But cortisol manager, I mean, the main ingredient in it is ashwagandha. What else is in it? I'm blanking.
It's a whole bunch of other
Okay.
herbs. And it's really, and I'll say the reason we use it, and if we're going to address cortisol issues adjacently during healing protocols, it's usually for sleep because
Yeah.
sleep is such an important part of healing overall that helping someone with sleep goes such a long way. And if we can supplement temporarily, once again, this is a temporary thing, then it's going to help their overall healing process just overall. And so Cortisol Manager, and this is a product by Integrative Therapeutics, is this nice blend to help bring down your cortisol before bed. Usually we recommend people take it 30 to 60 minutes before bed, one to two capsules, I think is the standard dose before bed. And that will help people kind of bring those cortisol levels down to help them fall asleep and stay asleep.
Yeah, and just like you keep the jigsaw adrenal cocktail on hand, that cortisol manager is one that I keep on hand for when I'm traveling, when I'm going through, periods of stress, when I'm doing maybe some energy healing and I know I'm not going to sleep for a couple days. Like that supplement it is like the golden supplement to me. It's such a good little helper to have on hand.
Yeah. I do you also want to say, and I say this because I am this person, not everyone does well with ashwagandha. And if you notice products like this or ashwagandha by itself or another blend of herbs that has ashwagandha in it is almost a little bit more activating for you, you may also fall into this category of ashwagandha can be very stimulating for some people, not everyone, but there are a good amount of people that fall into that category. And you may notice you have almost the opposite reaction to certain products like this. So I do just want to say, like, if you're not weird, there's nothing wrong with you if you fall into this category. It's just how your body works.
Yeah. And if that is the case, the liposomal L-theanine in GABA that's another good option that we use. That's like a liquid pump. And that one is just so good for, I mean, the GABA in it and the L-theanine is really good for just like calming the body and the mind down. And I'll tend to use that when I have clients who are like really, really high stress, like all throughout the day, not just at night. We will almost always add that in just to, again, is like a tool, a helper to help get their body back into like a grounded state.
Yeah, and if you fall into the category of a person who's like, is it anxiety? Is it cortisol dysregulation? Is it both? This is a really valuable product. And this is L-theanine and GABA. So the one we use is a combo. It's from Quicksilver Scientific, and it's a liquid that just you do a couple pumps under your tongue, hold it. It's not gonna push you to sleep, but it just kind of the way I describe it is it takes the edge off. It can help with all of those looping, racing thoughts, like the brain just being on all of the time. You can take it throughout the day as well, and it'll just kind of help recenter you a little bit. And this is really commonly used in um, if you look at any of the protocols in like holistic psychiatry, like anyone in that world, like L-theanine and GABA are two really common products that are really used in cortisol healing in general.
Yeah.
Magnesium glycinate is another really big one that is often used, or some sort of magnesium lotion, magnesium spray. Magnesium, you can pretty easily become magnesium deficient when you're under a lot of chronic stress. And so if that's the case, you probably have some cortisol dysregulation issues, in which case, yes, magnesium may be good for you. Please be careful which magnesium you use. The lotions and the sprays are usually pretty good. If you use like Epsom salt, magnesium sulfate, that's usually pretty good. But when it comes to the supplemental forms, be very, very careful. There's one product in particular I do just want to call out, only because I've seen other providers recommend this so often and cause a lot of other issues, and that's Calm. The product Calm, which is a powdered form of magnesium citrate. Magnesium citrate, along with magnesium oxide, are stool softeners. That is their only purpose, is a stool softener. Now, if you also happen to have issues with constipation, yes, those may help you feel better. However, for someone like for me, even when I had constipation issues, magnesium citrate would make me like really crampy. Like I would get a lot of abdominal pain and cramping and discomfort. And then sometimes it would help with the constipation, sometimes it wouldn't. But it is a tool used for constipation and stool softening. It's not something we use commonly in our practice because there's some better options if you are dealing with constipation. But that product specifically is promoted as a way to calm down at the end of the day. And I've seen too many people not understand the different forms of magnesium that they just go to that one. And then all of a sudden they end up with a lot of issues with loose stool, with abdominal discomfort. And that's the reason why there are better forms of magnesium out there that you can use. Magnesium glycinate is probably my favorite as far as like, just an overall magnesium. However, with cortisol, especially if you end up with a lot of issues with like brain fog, trouble concentrating, trouble remembering, which there's likely some other stuff going on here as well that's playing a role. Magnesium L-threonate is a really, really good one. Life Extension has a really good one. It's not the only one, but that's a common brand that we'll use. And that is the only form of magnesium that crosses the blood-brain barrier, which is really valuable. It helps, get the magnesium into the brain. It can help with focus, cognition, memory, recall, all that kind of stuff. Especially going into, once again, in this transition to perimenopause and menopause, if you end up with some cognitive symptoms, that can be a really valuable tool for you to use. And once again, like this is just having worked with practitioners in the holistic like psychology, psychiatry space, like this is a tool that they often use and they'll often recommend for cortisol regulation kind of pieces within this. There are also other forms of magnesium, and maybe we'll do a whole episode on magnesium, but I'd say those two are the best, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then I think magnesium malate is a decent form too, but kind of for what we're talking about, the glycinate and the magnesium, did you say L-threonate?
Mhm.
Threonate? Yeah. Those two are for sure going to be like the best forms. And then as far as supplements, I feel like those are the big things. Is there any other supplements that you wanted to
Yeah, so
touch on?
I've been on all of the supplements. So at one time I was on 18 supplements
Oof.
just for cortisol regulation.
Oh my God,
Um,
are you kidding me?
no, no, and I was on them for 4 months.
Oh,
So yeah, I feel super, once again, like this is something that's like so near and dear to my heart because I was on so many supplements. All kinds of adaptogens. We already mentioned ashwagandha, rhodiola is a really big one. Um, um, B5 is a yeah, B5 and B2 are actually really common ones as well. Sometimes B6 or B complex will also be given to help restore energy levels. A lot of times people aren't even testing for those, which is a whole other conversation, but that's also really, really common. There's another product that I was put on several times that I don't I don't know how many like I can maybe think of like 2 to 5 times I've ever recommended this product. But ADB5 by Biotics is one, and it's another blend. This is one taken in the morning. Sometimes you can take it also at lunch, and this will help bring up your cortisol levels a little bit in the morning. If you are testing low, you do absolutely want to test before taking this product, in my opinion. So this can be taken to help raise your cortisol levels. I've also been put on full spectrum hemp oil to help bring down the cortisol levels in the evening. Yeah, but I mean, vitamin C by itself, zinc by itself. Please never take zinc by itself. You're going to end up with a zinc copper imbalance. So yeah, I mean, those are really, really big ones. I'll also say, once again, just because this has happened to me, be very careful taking iron supplements and being recommended iron supplements. I've also been put on when I had like pretty significantly low cortisol. I was also showing anemia patterns, not really, that they didn't know how to test properly and interpret properly. And so I was put on iron to help bring up my energy levels. Please be very careful taking iron. Once again, like I can think of
we could
maybe,
do a whole podcast
yeah,
episode on iron.
we will for sure. But maybe two people have ever put like a specific iron supplement. Otherwise, we use some other things. But just be very careful taking iron. Many, many people do not actually need iron. If they do need iron, they also need some other cofactors that go along with that in order to properly absorb it. So just be very, very careful about that.
Yeah,
Um,
and same thing, which you mentioned this with the zinc too, same
yeah,
concept. And that's where like looking for like a whole food form, like oysters or something, oyster capsules is going to be your better bet than just taking zinc by itself.
Absolutely. So yeah, those are some of the big ones. Once again, like adaptogenic mushrooms are really big. Those are actually something that I use a lot. I love mushrooms, adaptogenic mushrooms, and some other ones here. But I'm such a huge fan, and those can be really great. Cordyceps are really great for just overall energy levels. Lion's mane really good for focus and cognition. Reishi is often commonly used to help with relaxation, help bring you down. Turkey tail is more immunity, but I've also seen blends with that just to help support the immune system as you're trying to regulate cortisol. So yes, those are also options as well. Yeah, I think those are kind of the big products that I've been put on that I've seen in a lot of other people's protocols.
Yeah, and the first maybe three or four that we talked about are the ones that we typically like lean towards. We by no means are we recommending like all these different products at one time. We usually
Yeah.
try and stick to realistically just maybe like one, maybe two if we're adding in some lion's mane, I would say. But yeah, we try and keep it to like, one or two of these supplements when working with someone. And then we actually talk about like lifestyle changes. Getting out in the sun first thing in the morning when you wake up to help regulate your circadian rhythm. That's a
So
really big one.
yeah, real quick, I just want to say so these are natural ways. So we're going to start going over natural ways to start regulating your cortisol levels.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's the big one.
Getting
Getting
out
getting
of
some
sun.
sunshine in the morning and preferably not just standing in front of the window, like actually stepping outside to in letting the sun hit your face. There's a difference because the window's going to block some of those UV rays. So, and then just putting your feet like outside on the grass or even on the cement, like that is called grounding. And yes, you can ground from putting your feet on, the concrete as well. It doesn't have to only be in the grass. What are some other big ones?
So
Waking.
I just want to talk about the sunshine, the natural light here. So natural light, especially first thing in the morning, but also if you can throughout the day as well. Like if you can get out at lunchtime, if you can get out when the sun is setting. And the reason why is this is going to help naturally reset your circadian rhythm, which your circadian rhythm and your cortisol regulation and your cortisol cycle, those two things go hand in hand because you should be most awake in the morning and then throughout the day, especially towards the end of the day when it's dark, like that's when you should be the sleepiest and your cortisol should be the lowest. And that really corresponds with just our natural circadian rhythm.
Yeah, and watching the sunset, watching the sun go down absolutely helps with that. Yeah. So I mean, that's I guess I only talked about the morning because, when we're starting to work with people, like we try to make small changes to not make it overwhelming, but 100% like ideally end goal would be to get out at least 3 times a day and even get a little walk in there, hopefully, because that's going to be helpful too. Um, but yeah, so the next big thing that I touched on would be, trying to eat breakfast within an hour of waking up is such a huge thing. Ultimately, what fasting is doing for most people, I will say, when you're not eating in the morning, you're putting stress on your body. You're creating stress, and then your cortisol levels, your blood sugar regulation, all of these things are like spiking and it creates a very, very unstable pattern in your body. So if you can actually wake up in the morning and get some food in you, meaning, not a bowl of cereal, like some protein, some fat, whatever that may look like for you, that's going to be really helpful in this area.
So important. This is one of the best things you can do to help regulate your cortisol. Have a higher protein and fat breakfast. Yes, you can absolutely have some carbs in there as well, but really prioritizing at least 20 or 30 grams of protein, at least. Then some good fats and some carbohydrates if you want as well. The carbohydrates are good for your brain first thing in your morning as well to give you some fuel here. The other really big mistake when it comes to this is drinking caffeine
Mm.
right when you wake up. And here's the thing, skipping breakfast and just having the coffee or caffeine, this can actually lead to more weight gain. And once again, especially that lower belly fat. And this is because this is triggering an insulin response. And this is going to trigger your body to hold on to more body fat. which for most people is not what you're looking for. Even if you're trying to gain weight, you're probably not trying to gain body fat for most people. If you want to add weight, this is usually more muscle, maybe some body fat, but this is not kind of the right way to add on body fat, in my opinion. So yeah, this is really important. Breakfast. Breakfast does so many things for your blood sugar, for your energy levels. This also helps to stabilize your blood sugar throughout the rest of the day, not only for breakfast, but for the entire rest of the day, which if you have something, hormonal imbalances like PCOS, there's also a good chance you have some cortisol dysregulation issues. One of the best things you can do to regulate all of your hormones and help really regulate your blood sugar and insulin levels is eating breakfast first thing in the morning. This protein, fat, maybe a little bit of carbs here. And just like a couple ideas here, you can do like a breakfast scramble. This could be eggs, some sort of breakfast sausage. I love me some chicken sausage. I
Mm-hmm.
don't typically do eggs, so breakfast chicken sausage is a huge part of my breakfast a lot of times. You can also do ground meat, do some sort of like starchy carb in there, like a sweet potato is kind of what I go to. I'll usually put in some like spinach or greens in there, some apples with some spices, and all of those things have some fat in them. So you're getting protein, you're getting fat, and then you're getting some good starchy carbohydrates plus some fiber. Like, what a perfect breakfast.
Yeah, and we've been doing excuse me, we've been doing like a breakfast egg bake with like broccoli and like putting some bacon in it, and to make sure that we get that 25 to 30 grams on the side, we'll usually add in some kind of like chicken sausage or something and put some sweet potato on the bottom. There's there's so many good things that you can do for breakfast, and I'm pretty sure that you made a reel recently about some different breakfast options. So if you're looking for more, you can always head over to the TikTok page or Instagram page and find that reel and check it out. Megan gave like 4 or 5 suggestions on there. Um, but kind of looping back to the coffee thing really quick. When you're having these anxiety symptoms, like Megan was talking about before, that kind of go hand in hand with the cortisol stuff. When you drink coffee on an empty stomach, you are going to feel more anxious. I don't know like a single person who it doesn't make them feel that way. And that's also one of these really big things where when we make this shift of making sure, to eat some food before we have our coffee, that right there it's a really, really small thing. And it can make you feel so much better in the sense of not having that like anxiety, kind of like shakiness, those rapid thoughts, small change that has a huge impact on your body.
Yeah, and here's the real reason why. It's because coffee is going to naturally raise and give you a little cortisol spike. Which, which is okay, but if you're on an empty stomach, this is not good. And if you've already got cortisol dysregulation issues and we're getting an unnatural spike of cortisol, this is not going to help you in the long run. You also, like, if you get hangry, like, this is a really bad sign. Like, if if you don't have a lot of like if you have or I'm sorry, if you have a lot of brain fog and cognitive issues and you're trying to use the caffeine, like especially caffeine on empty to help support that, like this is not going to help you in the long run. Yeah, you might get that temporary spike, and this is where you can end up leading to excessive caffeine use. And once again, I say this from personal experience, that you're just trying to, because you will get a spike in this with the caffeine for most people, but it's not the right kind of spike, especially when you're doing this on empty.
Yeah, and you're curbing your appetite as well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
affecting your hormones. And if you're already dealing with not feeling hungry in the morning, you're for sure not going to feel hungry if you drink a cup of coffee on empty.
Yeah, for sure. So, this is all about reducing stress. So, adding in a mindfulness activity, and we're going to wait until we are definitely going to do a part two, and we're going to
Yeah.
dive deeper into how we actually address cortisol issues. And we're going to get into nervous system regulation. We're going to do a really deep dive into that. But yeah, adding in a mindfulness practice, especially at the end of the day, can be really valuable to help you sleep. Sleep is super important when it comes to regulating your cortisol. Meditation, breath work, journaling, some sort of somatic exercise, like anything like that's going to be very supportive, of helping you regulate your cortisol levels.
Yeah. I mean, we could dive into this a lot. So I think I'll wait to add on to that until maybe our next episode, but something small too. Or let me add this in because when we say mindfulness, I feel like automatically people think meditation 20 to 30 minutes long, and that's not what we mean. Like it can be something that's like, I mean, 2 to 3 minutes, honestly. Anything in that time frame can count as a mindfulness activity. So it doesn't need to be something crazy long, just something to, set the tone for your night, or if you're doing it in the morning, set the tone for your day. Yeah, it's going to help regulate your nervous system.
Yeah. And then just to kind of wrap up, just like two other big things to think about when it comes to regulating your cortisol is just total stress on your body. And two real big controllables here are caloric intake. Really try not to be in a significant caloric deficit. It's not going to help you lose weight if you've got cortisol dysregulation issues. And honestly, it can really go the opposite way, and it can lead to more weight gain or just more struggle in being able to lose weight. And then the other thing is excessive exercise. And here's the other thing with this, like that really depends on the person. What excessive to one person may not be excessive to another person. And so this really is looking at what is your workout history, like what have you been doing, and then how significant are your total stressors on your body? And we'll talk about that in the part two of just like total stress inside and outside of the body. But just be very mindful of just making sure you're eating enough and actually giving your body nutrients, and then not over exercising. And another really classic kind of sign of cortisol dysregulation issues is if you're tired all the time, but you love doing HIIT workouts or like really intense, like a really intense hot yoga class, or like something super intense here, you're going to get an unnatural spike of cortisol. Once again, this has also shown up. I've also had a straight line with a spike where I worked out and then it came right back down. Because it'll give you a spike of cortisol, which means you'll feel really good, you'll feel alert, you'll feel energized, but then you will crash. And if you feel that crash point shortly after you work out, that's a sign that workout's probably a little too intense for you.
Yeah, and I definitely remind me next time. I want to dive into the hot, intense yoga stuff as well, because I know a lot of people think that this is like some calming thing, but yeah, I can't wait to dive more into that too.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're going to stop there, and we are definitely going to do a part two, and we're going to talk about the two biggest things we're going to talk about is total stress on the body, and how to figure out and address that, and then nervous system regulation. And these are really the two keys to healing cortisol dysregulation issues long term, and then most importantly, staying healed. And for me, like it wasn't until I addressed both of these together, that I saw long-term progress and have been able to stay healed. We'll also talk about maintenance protocols and keeping your cortisol regulated, especially because stress is going to happen. You're going to go through stressful periods of time, and it's just about how to support your body appropriately during those times that can keep your cortisol regulated.
Love it. And yeah, so much more to add to that too, but it's gonna have to wait till the next one.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Be sure to stay tuned for part two because we are a newer podcast. Reviews and ratings go a really long way. So if you can leave us a 5-star review or rating, we would really, really, really appreciate it. Like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.